Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for joining us today. My name is Rashmita, and I am the event planner for Microsoft Reactor India. This session will run over the next 60 minutes, including Q&A. But before we begin today's session, please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We are all here to learn together, so please be respectful of other people's views, understanding of differences, being kind and considerate in the way you engage. The chat section will be open throughout, and we do encourage you all to participate. So please feel free to drop all your questions in the chat section. I would now like to welcome Sandeep, our speaker for today's session. Sandeep is a skilled Microsoft Power Platform developer who loves creating low code enterprise apps. He's currently working at Argano, but for now, I will hand over to Sandeep to begin the session. Let me bring him into the stream. There you go. Over to you, Sandeep.
Thank you. Thanks, Rashmita. Thanks for that introduction. A warm welcome to everyone to another Microsoft Reactor series today with me. Uh, and today we are again in the Microsoft series. Here's another exciting topic. And today we are focusing on creating custom copilots, which would be a crash course into the Copilot Studio. We'll dive deep into the all the capabilities of creating custom agents through Copilot Studio, but also we'll start with all the building blocks that one needs to get started with, or one needs to first master before getting into the AI capabilities of custom copilots or custom agents. A little bit about me before we go ahead. I'm Sandeep Angara. I'm working at Argano. I'm based out of Hyderabad, India, and as I'm working at Argano as a technical consultant. Argano is a Microsoft inner circle partner, and for the last 2.5 years, I have been instrumental in developing low-code business applications using Microsoft Power Platform. My key strengths in Power Platform are Power Automate, Copilot Studio, and Power Apps. I work mostly on the model-driven app side, and then I also have some experience with Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations as well. So in my period at Argano, I have been worked on several interesting projects that include Copilot Studio and also integrations between finance and operations and Power Platform. I also do some of the community contributions in my free time. You would find me some blogging sometimes in LinkedIn. Also, I'd also answer questions on MS forums as well, very little times. So uh, please feel free to connect over me on LinkedIn, and if I can help you at any time within Power Platform space, I'm happy to do that. And please feel free to connect me over LinkedIn. With all that introduction about me has done, let's jump into the agenda today. It's very simple. We'll first start with the introduction to the Copilot Studio, and then let's explore what are all the building blocks that we need to know about Copilot Studio, so that we can actually go ahead into the Copilot Studio directly and start building our custom agents. We'll also have a demonstration. Mostly we'll be spending much of our time today in uh, building some use case in the Copilot Studio, where I'll be demonstrating building out end-to-end Copilot or the agent. Throughout this session, I'll be using Copilot or also agent. They can used interchangeably, but they mean the same. And I'll also conclude the session with all the other capabilities that Copilot Studio has. To start with the introduction to the Copilot Studio, it is a Microsoft Power Platform offering. It is a low-code, no-code offering from Power Platform umbrella. If you have had the Power Virtual Agents from earlier in the Power Platform stack, it is the same. It is just a rebranding from Microsoft, which is from Power Virtual Agents to Copilot Studio today. It's not just a rebranding of the product in Power Platform, but there is very much more than that, because today the AI capabilities, as Microsoft has been investing a lot of into OpenAI, so today it is bringing almost into any product the AI capabilities. It's bringing AI capabilities into almost every product of Microsoft. So that's the resultant. Today we have Copilot Studio, where I can say it glues together data connectors and plugins with AI capabilities. Why would I say that is it if we need to get any of the enterprise data, be it in the Microsoft ecosystem or be it out of the Microsoft ecosystem, we'll be easily able to connect to the enterprise data, and we can also get the user input as in the Copilot Studio and combine with AI capabilities. Even today, we have access to the AI builder, AI models into the AI models into the AI builder, so that we can input data from Copilot Studio or get the data from any of our wherever our enterprise data is sitting, be it in the same Microsoft ecosystem or be it in a third party, for example, say ServiceNow, Salesforce, anything, SAP, anything. So we can get the data from enterprise data from anywhere and combine it with the AI capabilities to get the tasks done on behalf of the user and even answer queries to the users. So as Microsoft is being telling that AI is the new UI, so Copilot Studio is a better example for that, a best example for that, because copilots or agents being AI companions, they are going to be the new user interface. So saying all that, we'll just jump into the building blocks. So as you have attended this session, I can also expect that you would also know what agents and what copilots can do, and also what is Copilot Studio in Power Platform offerings. So we'll get started with the building blocks. So let us explore each and every building block or each and every basic concept into the Copilot Studio, and then jump into building a simple agent so that we'll get hands-on towards the Copilot Studio end of the session. So let's begin with topics first. So the topics are nothing but the conversation paths in copilots or agents. Let us imagine a scenario where if you are using some other internet service providers for your home network or Wi-Fi. Let's say you would like to have the payment for that internet service provider for your Wi-Fi connection, and you go to their website of ISP internet service provider's website, and you just go and type if they are offering a copilot. So let's imagine they're offering a chatbot or copilot into their website, and let's say you would like to make a payment into that using by chatting with by conversing with that copilot. So when you type in or you click a button on that same copilot or agent, if you type in payment, it would navigate you to the conversation where everything you talk about is payment and everything it responds about is related to the payment terms. So everything, like if or else let's say, take another case of reporting a reporting an issue with your internet service provider. Let's say that, and you type in I have an issue or log a complaint, and it understands your intent and understands your meaning, and it navigates you to a conversation where it will ask more details about the issue and all. So it's nothing but the conversation paths. So when we are building an agent or a copilot, they're actually we are solving different couple things, where be it conversing with the copilot with the user and getting their giving their requested answers, or making or performing some actions on user's behalf. So those are in Copilot Studio. To build a conversation path for a user, we would do that using topics. And then let's come to the another building block, which is trigger phrases. So trigger phrases are nothing but the starting points of the topics. So whenever I say payment, I need to make a payment, or I need to log a complaint. These are all act as a trigger phrases, which in turn triggers the topics. Topics are nothing but again the conversation paths. So whenever the registered trigger phrases. So when we train some trigger phrases with some of the topics, and when a user comes into the copilot or agent and types in the same word or even any sentence that should mean that trigger phrases that we have registered, it would be triggering, and it would trigger the right topic for the user to perform those actions and perform what what was the right conversation path that user needs to be navigated. So simply they are starting points of topics. Nodes are nothing but So let's say we are building out a conversation path for payment, and when a user is navigated to the payments gateway and the payments information topic, we would need to ask what are all the other details, that which bill you are paying at, what is your preferred payment gateway and all. So we would actually do a series of steps, right? So if every series of steps we would call them as nodes in Copilot Studio. So each individual action we would call in the authoring canvas or the Copilot Studio as nodes. And the other building block we would need to talk about is entities. Entities are, they are registered, like I could say that entities are a real-time objects, we can say. So whenever a user types a prompt, if I had to type it, I had an issue on particular date. So this particular agent can recognize the dates. Similarly, not just age or not just dates, it can recognize age, persons, email, kind of like everything real-time objects. So if we have to register any real-time objects, and we and our copilot or agents needs to recognize it for the further use in the other topics, we would use entities. We can use the pre-built entities which system gives us, or we can also use custom entities by creating new entities into the Copilot Studio as well. As per the business requirement, we would also use the new entities which are custom entities. The other building block is actions. Actions are nothing but the name itself says it performs some action. So whenever our copilot needs to do some of the action, be it connecting to a Power Automate flow, in turn Power Automate flow connects to a third party data connectors and bringing up the data and pulling up the data and putting it into the Copilot Studio. So this was a best example of action. Today we also have native support for connectors. If you are from Power Platform background, you would see data connectors in Power Automate, Power Apps, and all. So the same native support to connecting to different data sources, be it Dataverse, be it Salesforce, be it ServiceNow, anything. Like we are for some of those I mentioned earlier, there is a native support within the Copilot Studio to connect to the data. So actions are simply the actions are simply the nodes that would do some action, be it Power Automate flow, be it any other data connector actions that we would add. We'll also see in a practical by implementing that. Knowledge knowledge is today, as I'm saying, there are AI capabilities that are blended into the Copilot Studio. So knowledge is resultant of that. Today we have OpenAI generative AI capabilities into the Copilots. So our agent can actually get into the different knowledge sources that we add. Knowledge sources can be of different types, be it an external website, be it a own document that you prepared using Word, or if you have a PDF document. And there is also support for different types of documents altogether in Copilot Studio. So you could add documents, you could actually link an external website, you could actually link a Dataverse table. So be it anything of what Copilot Studio supports. So from that, it would get the data that user requests for, and it generates the response. So generative AI, we all know how ChatGPT responds to our questions. It would give, uh, if you want to have a very lengthy message, we would just ask and it would actually give it. And even if you type in how many of the words that you would require that reply from the ChatGPT, it can trim it and do everything. So similarly, it would generate responses from the knowledge sources that we ground our copilot or agent on. Channels are a way to publish our copilot or agents. End of the day, we would need our copilot or agent to be used by our end users. So there should be a way that we could publish to one or the other channels. So channels, there is a support for Teams, which is any official communication channel in almost every industry, and there is WhatsApp, there is external websites, and there are many other. There is also a Slack support for Slack channels. So when you build a copilot or an agent and you would need your end users To access this agent from one or the other channel, you would publish to those channels available. You could publish to one channel or more. There is another another thing called conversation boosting. Conversation boosting and these knowledge sources work hand in hand. So actually, the conversation boosting is nothing but whenever a user intent is not being registered in topics. Let us say we had a topic for payments, we had a topic for logging a complaint for our internet service provider, but we don't registered a topic for, let's say, how to fix a router problems. Like if the user it's themselves can have to check, can check some of the quick fixes, and we don't have such information registered in topics, we can just have a document prepared for it, and we would enable the conversation boostings so that it would actually go into the knowledge sources and fetch all the information and generates a response to the user. Also, there is two types here. One is knowledge sources. The conversation boosting gets all the information from knowledge sources or the classic data. Classic data is the classic AI knowledge. So whenever there is no knowledge registered in our Copilot for this agent, there's no knowledge to look into. So it would actually get the data from the classic AI knowledge, which we all know how OpenAI responds to our questions in ChatGPT, right? In a similar fashion, conversation boosting would fetch out all the information from classic AI knowledge if there is no knowledge registered in our Copilot. Orchestration is another brilliant way, which is very recently introduced in Copilot Studio. Orchestration is of two types. One is classic orchestration, and another is generative orchestration. So the classic orchestration is manually we would need to design and develop all the topics, and then we would actually suggest, and we'll actually develop all the conversation path by ourselves, where it is actually the user's questions or prompts are actually triggered by the topics by using the mechanism called trigger phrases. But in generative actions, we'll mostly develop the pieces, but we do not connect the dots, or we do not keep all together in topics. We actually don't develop, we don't even need to develop topics. It's all action oriented. So whenever we would need to use generative orchestration, we just need to have some knowledge sources, and we just need to have some actions enabled and actions created for that copilot based on what problem our copilot or agent is trying to solve. And once that is developed, the generative AI itself will pick what is the combination of actions, knowledge sources, and topics can solve or can satisfy a user prompt. So it would actually get itself or get itself doing the things without even compiling some topics by the developer or the maker. So saying all that, explaining almost every building block of Copilot Studio, would also have some other things, but these are the main things that we would need to have awareness on for starting out to building custom agents in Copilot Studio. So now let's get into it, the demonstration part. I'll turn off my camera so that I could share my full screen, and it should be a good experience for that. I'll quickly jump into the Copilot Studio now. So this is the Copilot Studio, where we will actually jump into the home screen first. This is how the home screen looks like. Most of you have seen this screen, and also have explored some other things like agents, library, and all. But let's just a quick just quick overview on this. So Create tab actually creates a new agent. There are two things. One, a maker or developer can create from scratch, building out the topics and or else in this home screen itself, you could say some prompt. So according to your prompt, so so think it this way. If you have a business problem that you would like to solve it through Copilot or an agent, you would get prepared a prompt that would actually solve this problem, so that everything it should be in the prompt. And once you give the prompt, it would actually create some topics for you, and it would Also try to create some actions, and it would give you a template so that you get going, you get started with the development of a copilot or agent here. Else you could also create it from scratch, giving all the configuration details and also the other, and then start creating topics in the authoring canvas. Authoring canvas is nothing but where you would actually create topics, actions, and nodes. In the agents tab, we would have what are all the agents that is developed in this environment or created in this environment. This is a standard offering from Microsoft, which is M365 Copilot. And library, this is this is place where everything exists from connectors and also other collections as well. As I was saying, there is a native support for data connectors in the Copilot Studio itself. These are few examples where you could connect to Zendesk, Salesforce, Slack, ServiceNow. So these connectors are ready to use directly in the Copilot Studio. So now let's start building a new agent. So I just don't want any prompts, or I don't want to the help of AI for now for just creating my new agent. So I'll just skip to configure. Or else, if you would like to chat with OpenAI for creating at least a template for you so that you could then start from there, you could actually interact with this OpenAI and then get started your development with the agents. So I'll skip to configure so that I could manually enter some details like description, instructions, name of the agent, and then icon as well. So let's say today we are demonstrating an expense. I would name it expense manager, and let's try to solve a simple problem where so uh, this is I had clicked on the skip to configure so that it would actually give me this interface where I can start configuring my agent and then actually create the topics later. So once that here we are trying to solve a very simple problem, let's say expense manager, where employees get into this agent, and this agent will actually help employees to create their expenses and also send out an approval to their manager. Let's focus on the copilot part, and everything that I have been pre-built, I'll also explain that. But this part where we'll focus on the the topics and trigger phrases and all the nodes, so that we'll be able to create agents end to end using Copilot Studio. So I name it as expense manager, and here we are seeing description and instructions. So these are the fields. Whenever we are using OpenAI capabilities in Copilot Studio, it is essential that we provide the information over here in description and instructions, because it would actually, when I was saying the generative orchestration, this would actually make it the tone, like whenever responding to the user's queries or user's prompt, it would actually make those tone and as per the instructions that were given. So if you are an expense manager and use these kinds of words and you be professional, everything that you would instruct to a human agent, let's say, you can also instruct this agent, this virtual agent, so that this would also follow those instructions while conversing with the OpenAI responses to the people that are using this agent. So I'll now create this agent. So because we are just for this agent, we are just using creating an end-to-end agent where we will use topics, nodes, and other actions, and we'll also see how generative orchestration would look like at the end. Once my agent is created, here is here is here is the interface. So on my left side navigation, I am having the details where description, instructions, you would also can always edit over here. Orchestration you would disable if it is generative orchestration, if you would enable, or else you could disable. Knowledge sources, as I said, we can ground our data with any of the different knowledge sources that are mentioned, which is data or SharePoint, public sites, or even a document that you have compiled. So that would about this knowledge and actions. Actions are we can add a different actions like getting a row, running a script, and even from the library itself. But there are multiple actions that are actually being added into the Copilot Studio as well. So what are all the actions that currently have support? You could always use them. The right side navigation is a pane to test your agents. So whenever you start building topics with some trigger phrases and start building all the logic that you would have for your business problem, you can always test your agent how it is performing. So let's say I just type in hi. So whenever I did not do I did not do anything. I just created an agent with the name Expense Manager, and I'm just testing my agent with a simple message hi, and it is getting me hello. How can I help you today? So when I click this message, it would actually give you, as we are in the Maker portal or and we are developing the current agent. So when clicking on this, would actually show me which topic it has triggered. So why was this topic triggered? We could actually get together with this testing this agent. So whenever I clicked, it showed me the greeting, so that this is the topic that triggered. And when we have a look at the trigger phrases, we are having hi, hello, good morning, and good afternoon. So some of the salutations or some greetings. So for those greetings, this would trigger this topic, and in this topic we only have these notes. So when I was explaining notes, so these are every action that we add in a topic is called a node. So when in a topic you would need some other nodes. Let's say you would need to send another message or you would ask a question. Everything you could do by just clicking the plus icon, so that you would actually have all the list of nodes that you could use over here. So this interface is actually called authoring canvas. So in this authoring canvas, you could add more nodes into these topics or altogether create custom topics. So when I go to the topics page, here I am seeing custom topics and then the system topics. So in the custom topics, there are a few topics that were created by the altogether, like they come default, so that we could actually enable them or disable them. It is in our hands, or we can also create a topic from blank. So seeing this, we could easily understand how a topic works. So whenever I greeted, it triggered me this trigger phrase, and the greeting topic has been activated, and then the message has been displayed, and we don't have any other actions or nodes over here, so it ended over there. So let's start creating a new topic, so that we would actually solve the earlier mentioned problem, where this agent would actually create an expense ticket for an employee that who has logged in into this agent. And it creates, let's say, for the purpose of simplicity, I just use the SharePoint, and a Power Automate flow is on the back end creates a ticket in the expense record in the SharePoint, and then sends an approval to my manager. So this is how this topic works. For that, I'll just go with the blank topic, where I would add some trigger phrases, because whenever a user comes over there, there should be some way that should navigate to this topic. Let's say user wants to type, let's expect a user to type in that he or she would need to add an expense or create expense. So I'll add few trigger phrases: create expense, submit expense, new expense. You can also create some more trigger phrases. It is ideal to create 5 to 10 trigger phrases, and you could also see some of the tips that Microsoft is recommending. So when we created these trigger phrases, we are not expecting that user should only mention that create expense, submit expense, and new expense. But even if a user prompt with a single sentence that I would like to create a new expense even though this topic would be triggered because because it would understand the language, and it would understand the intent of the user, and it would actually map it to this relevant topic. So that's how trigger phrases work. We'll just rename it as topic create expense. I'll just add a message so as to test if my trigger phrase is working. So I would say just hi, creating your expense. And I would say just please create a new expense. Let's see if it works. Yeah. So whenever I try to prompt it like a please create a new expense, it triggered my topic underscore create expense, and then it is displaying a message hi creating your expense. So here I just don't want to stop with a simple message, but this is a simple demonstration of how a message node works. You can add a simple text message, or if you would click on add, there are some other capabilities. Some of these might not be you might not be able to see it on your screen because this is actually a preview version of the Copilot Studio, where some preview features are also been able to we can able to access those preview features as well. But we have different message variations. For example, adaptive card. You could s- you could simply without actually simply creating a free text message, you could also create a good UI looking cards, and you could also display them. So I'll for now remove this message node, and I will start asking questions, because whenever a user wants to create a new expense, we would actually, for creating a new expense in our SharePoint in the backend, we would need to ask questions, right? So we would actually want to gather all the data. So we would use another node called ask a question. And before I'll go further, I'll just show up my Power Automate flow where we would use it here, so that this Power Automate flow actually creates an expense record in SharePoint. So that I have created a simple Power Automate flow, which I would need some inputs like category, description, amount, a link to the receipts, and the date of the expense. So once these inputs are I get from the Copilot or agent, this Power Automate flow is responsible for creating a new record in my SharePoint list, and also it creates an approval in Teams for my manager. For now, I just created for assigned it to myself, but you could also use Office Connector to get the respective manager and send an approval to their manager. So once it is completed, I will set a variable to true, and it actually waits for the approval for on the manager side, and it responds to the Copilot once an approval is sent to their manager. So this is in background how my Power Automate flow is designed. So in order for me to gather all these inputs so that my Power Automate flow actually goes and creates an item in the SharePoint and actually sends an approval to my manager, I would ask these questions in my agent and gather all the answers, all the inputs from my user, and call this Power Automate flow within this topic. So to do that, I would need to ask questions, right? So ask what is the category that you would like to create an expense for, what would you provide some description, what's the amount, where is the link for the receipts, and also the date. Let's try to ask the first question, which is the category. What is the category? I could ask this. So this is where entities come into action. So you could create custom entities, or you could also leverage the inbuilt inbuilt standard entities. So standard entities, what are all the standard entities that are available in Copilot Studio? To know that, you could just simply scroll out here, or you can go to the settings, and then when you go to the settings, it would also give you. Let me remove for this for now. I'll save this. I'll go to settings and I'll go to the entities. So in this tab, you would give the system would provide you some of the inbuilt entities where whenever a user prompts it with this information, it would actually recognize whenever let's say a user is enters my age is 25. It would in all that prompt, in all the sentence that provided by the user, you the copilot exclusively picks up that key information which is age. So whenever we are asking the age of a user, he might not enter the directly the number. He might enter my age is 25, but we don't require all that input. We just need the number, the age number. So to recognize such real-time objects or even the custom objects that we would create, we would actually go and create entities for that. So now I would need to know what category that current employee or the user. Let me So my topic I have already created is this. So I'll ask a question and I will ask what is the category, or pick a category, anything you would ask over here, and I would identify a new category where I would actually create a new entity. So entity, I said there are pre-built entities which system provides you, or you would also create some custom entities. I would I would need to recognize which entity, which category that the current expense falls under. I have few in categories that I already developed and in my backend, like where in SharePoint. So such as learning and development, accommodation, travel, and then I had food and beverages. So let's say this one and save this. So what smart matching does is it is also one of the other feature of entity where this actually whenever in the same topic or in the same context, the copilot recognizes those inputs. It can use anywhere. That input can be used anywhere. If for some action age is required for another topic, it would actually fill in those details automatically, because in the same conversation or within the different conversation that the user had already entered that information. So we don't need to ask the user that question again. So I'm asking what is the category and I'm identifying as expense category. So I can also provide those options for users, so that users just don't want to type everything. bec- They just want to select it. So now I will again try to ask create an expense. So what is the category it is asking, and it is providing me the options that I have provided in that entity. So I can select travel. So I can select any of the given options. So we have not developed anything from this point. So the Copilot is not responding with anything. So I would just use these variables as well. So this comes to another another learning point where variables are used. So whenever we are asking questions, this particular question node would actually creates automatically a variable, so that the user response is captured and put it in those variables. So I would just keep it as where expense category. So this is the category. So I'll just now print what was the where expense category, not to print or not to just display it to the user again, but for our knowledge and for let's also understand the other thing called slot filling over here. So I'll say create an expense. Again, it would again provide me the options, and I can now provide learning and development. As we are displaying the same variable, it is giving me that option. Let us now let us now try a different thing. Let's say user, while prompting it themselves, like they have used the category already, so that with for a good experience, this entities on the slot filling entities and slot filling is nothing but whenever the user the intent or this entity is already captured by the copilot, it doesn't ask the question again. Let's say create an expense for travel. Ideally it shouldn't ask me again what is the category, because I in my prompt itself I have provided the category in my prompt itself, so it skips the question, because the this entity where it should the even the question should identify the expense category. But also there's a mechanism called slot filling, where whenever in a previous conversation or in the present conversation, the entity value, the list of values that we created in that entity are already been used, or an entity is already been recognized in the prompt of the user, it would actually capture those information and put it in the variable. So so that for a good experience it doesn't ask the question again and again. So let's go further. So I don't require this anymore because I demonstrated how slot filling works over here. So for our solving the problem, we would actually need other informations like description, amount, link, and date. But it's not a good experience to ask one by one each question one by one. So I would now like to delete this node, and I would like to leverage a new node called adaptive cards. So there is an action called ask with adaptive card. So displaying a message in an adaptive card is you could do that through sending a message and then adding an adaptive card. But whenever you would need to ask with an adaptive card a question and capture those responses from that adaptive card, you could use this ask with adaptive card option, where it would give you a, a widget where you would paste all the JSON that you prepared for an adaptive card. You could design an adaptive card using this adaptive card designer, but for now I have already developed an adaptive card, and I would now use this. So this is the adaptive card where I am asking category. Let me preview this. So it had all the options that have for category, the description, amount, expense date, and link to receipt. So I would just use this adaptive card. One thing we would use to 1.5 version. So an adaptive card was added. So let's see how our Copilot or Agento responds now. So now it in place of asking what is the category and all, because we deleted that node, it would actually give me an adaptive card where in the same card itself I can answer multiple questions. The user can answer multiple questions, so that it captures all the related information, required information from user within a single card. And once the submitted, I would capture all those into these variables. How these variables are automatically created are, there is a mechanism again here in the adaptive cards, but that was a whole lot of different discussion. But to quickly tell that, so whenever we add input elements, we would add IDs. So those IDs are they should be for they should be like unique for each of these input elements. So for category, it should be category. Description, I had an ID called DESC. So those are actually being created as variables over here, because whatever all the information that is filled by a user are need to be placed and captured in different variables. So all those are captured in different variables, so that I can now call my Power Automate flow, giving input all these variables. So let's say learning and development. Okay. Before I create an expense and test this, I'll actually call, I'll actually call my Power Automate flow. Sometimes it doesn't work because I already have a flow that was created, but it is not showing up here. No worries. Let's create a flow and I'll just copy everything over here. I would just need a variable initialize. Does it do? So it doesn't require. I would add all the related category and all the related information over here. What should I capture and all? I would name it as create new expense and save this. So that's how we create a Power Automate flow and then call it from within the topic in Copilot Studio. So I'll go here, I'll click on done, and I will again go and click on add an action, and an action would prompt over here. So you see now there's an issue with the loading, so it would it created actually two because the old one that I was referring earlier. So I will actually use the old one if at all have done anything wrong in the new one. And in the inputs now category, it was asking me category. I had a variable that the category should be by now captured, which is topic.category, and the local variables are actually created with an extension called topic dot. And global, there is also a variable global variables where they are created with global dot extension. The global variables can be used anywhere in different topics, but the topic like the local variables are to be used only within the same topic. And now I will input plug in this description. Where is this description? DSE. I'll plug in the amount that is captured in another variable. I'll plug in the link receipt. I'll plug in the data as well. I'll now save this. Okay, so date, we would need to another learning over here. Sorry. So sometimes there might be an issue with data change, that conversion of the data types. So we would always use this PowerFX formulas. So because we declared the data as a string over our Power Automate flow, so I would just need to convert this to text, not as a date. So once that is done, I'm good to test my agent now. I'll again ask create an expense. Now it gave me before I actually test. So because I am getting the result, I would just to confirm this that this worked, I'll also add the message note of the result. Create a new expense. It gives me an adaptive card. I will say this one description, certification fee, amount is 2000, expense date is today. I'll just give www.google.com. So it is actually returning true. That was actually developed in the Power Automate flow itself. Let's see the flow details, if it passed and all. And once an expense is created in SharePoint and then an approval has been sent to the uh, manager, it would actually return towards the Copilot. So once our Power Automate flow is successful, whenever we are using the Power Automate flows, we'll return back some outputs to the Copilot over here. So it is waiting for an approval, and it is actually created an expense approval for the manager, and it turned our variable to true. Now let's do conditioning over here. So I'll remove this and I will add a condition, another node to learn. So I'll take this variable as result. So because we are getting the result as a result from Power Automate flow, if it is equal to true, I will just add a message node. So this is a Boolean. You could also use true function. Oh, we are getting it as a, so I'll use, if it is equal to the true, I will just add a message, your expense has been created, and an approval. Let's ask create an expense again. So I would now test the conditions, foods and beverages, party, office party. I would test 3456. I would say today. I just submit now. So whenever it actually the flow is completed, it actually returns my result as a true. If it is successful or if it is false, it would actually get me false. So it somehow get into the other condition because we might not be actually calling it right, but we might not be actually, let's see, yeah, it actually returned it true, but let us see. So whenever it returns true, it would actually satisfies this condition, and it would display our message as your expense has been submitted successfully. So for time being, I am going into the another important topic where I would demonstrate the generative orchestration as well. So here, because we are running out of time, and so now I will leave this, and this is how a classic orchestration actually works. So because we drove everything, we drived everything through the topic. For example, let's say user needs to user needs to track the progress of where an expense report is, where is the approval tasks are over there, and when he or she would receive his expense reimbursements and all. So we would actually create another topic to track all those details. Let's ask a user a number to identify that particular expense, and we'll get this data from another data source and displays that information. But there is another way where we just need to have the actions configured, and our orchestration, our Copilot Studio system itself can actually do the job without actually being triggered them by through the topics and trigger phrases. For example, I have created another agent with the same name, but with an extension of GEO, which is stands for generative orchestration. And I would just now I had just added an an action, and I have no topic. Like you could see, I don't have any custom topic called create expense. But I'll try asking create a new expense. The only difference that the other agent that I was displaying and now was I just enabled the orchestration as generative, and I have not created any topic over here to capture all the user inputs and all, but I just added the action where the action is responsible for getting all the input and then creating a ticket in the SharePoint and then sending out the approval. So the main thing is I have only created a Power Automate flow and added into the actions, and I just turned the toggle on for generative orchestration. So I now again start asking create a new expense. Let's say how it responds. So it is actually calling the Power Automate flow and is actually asking what are all the inputs. I did not have manually asked these questions anywhere through topics, because in classic orchestration, we would actually add, if you need to ask a question to the user, you would need to actually have a topic for that, and within the topic you would need to add individual notes for each question. But for in generative orchestration is enabled. So whenever I try to create a new expense and have added an action, this is actually triggering this flow, because even in the actions I have provided a description that this particular flow is actually for creating an expense, and whenever creating a new expense or kind of trigger phrases were actually uh, being triggered from the user, this is the flow that needs to be added, because that was the action that is related to the user prompt. And even the flow, the action name, the action description matters over here, because this is generative orchestration. In the generative orchestration, it would select the topics, it would select the actions, it would select the knowledge sources added which are relevant to the prompt that was asked by the user. So here in our case, whenever the user prompts create new expense, this is the relevant action that this copilot or agent could find in this copilot, and it triggered, and it is asking itself without the developer or maker manually adding those questions. I would say 2025. You could see how the inputs are mapped to each relevant input from the questions as well. I provided the date, and this date is being filled in over here. So this is an activity map where how how is this generative orchestration actually making these actions and asking the questions and mapping out the relevant fields. So it mapped to the category. It now asked me the amount of the expense and it mapped it to the amount. And it again it is asking me what was the link to the receipts, and I'll just for my testing I'll give this google.com link, and then it would actually map to this link. And then what description you would provide like to provide the expense. This is the question I have not phrased over here or at any topic in this Copilot, but this is generative AI asking me what is the value that should I be plugged into the description input field for this action to be performed. So I would say just certification fee. And then now it doesn't ask us anything because those were the inputs that it needs to perform that action, and everything it asked me that questions without maker or the developer actually being creating a topic or nodes for that. And once that is complete, this session is completed. And if we see this at 5:03 at 5:03 p.m. in 30 in below 30 30 seconds ago, it actually triggered with all this informations. Again, you would actually go to this actions, and you can also reply. uh, you can also select how to output the information, like once the action is performed, how do you want this action to be responded to the user. You would send a message immediately after the running action. You would click this, and you create a message, or you create an adaptive card. You create it's a simple message: expense added successfully. So what this does is, whenever this action is performed, so it doesn't waits until another user's question, but just once this action is performed, it would display this message, or even it can display an adaptive card if you configure that in this action. So this is how actions work when the generative orchestration is being enabled. So you could also add other actions. Let us say whenever you are not using SharePoint but just using Dataverse as your, or Excel online business as your data source for recording all those expenses, you could natively use this direct connectors, so that whenever a user prompts for creating a new expense, this particular Excel online business connector or this action would be triggered, and this would ask all the questions that you have inputted. So let's say this was selected. Let's say what are all the setup that we would need to do. So it would just first ask you, it checks the connection. So this is the name, this is the authentication. If user should authenticate to that data source, or the Copilot, the service account, if you are using that, should be authenticate to or get the data from that data source. And you would ask usage description. This, as I'm telling, in generative orchestration, descriptions and instructions play a key role. This description actually plays a good role when it actually selects this particular action, and whenever it is relevant to the user's prompt or question. So what are all the inputs you would need to add over here, where which location that the present file is sitting, document library file, table and column, and response settings. Whenever this particular action is completed, what you would need to do, you just need to respond with the AI generated message. It can automatically generate if a message that it is successful or not, or you could manually do that with a message, or you could design an adaptive card. So that's the main difference between classic orchestration and generative orchestration, where you would enable that in the overview section, or you would also go to the settings and generative AI tab, and you would switch between orchestration methods. So that's how orchestration works. And we would just be have to cover one thing, which is knowledge sources. Let's say I'll go to this one, and the conversation boosting as well. So let's say conversation boosting. As I said, conversation boosting is a result of generative AI. So whenever a user asks a question through a prompt, and there is no topic to ask questions and do some logic over there, add conditions and all. But just we ground that our agent to some of the data sources, and it would look into the all the data source, be it a Word document or be it any other source, and it would look into all that source and it compiles a generative message with the data source. Let us say whenever an expense is submitted, it should when let's expect our users to ask some rules and regulations or guidelines when submitting an expense. For that, we just don't need to create topics for everything. uh, for this simple use case, let's say a document can be imported, where in this document, let me show this how this document is actually. So this document doesn't do nothing. Uh, it's very simple. It's just lays out all the rules and regulations over here. So let's say what is the submission process, timelines, expense categories, and all. So these are some guidelines. So you would need to actually give the description and the name that that should actually give some context to the copilot or the agent whenever this knowledge source to be fetched out for a particular prompt that user asks for. This source is used to answer users question, users queries over guidelines and rules. Any guidelines and rules. You can add such description and comments to that data source or the knowledge source that you added to, that you grounded your copilot to. And once that is done, let's say uh, what are some guidelines to follow. Let's say if I ask this question and see if my agent can actually retrieve that information and generate response to me. So this has generated actually, but this is not in par with or not in sync with what document that I have added. Because if you could see, AI generated content may be incorrect. This is all AI, but it is surfaced with Azure OpenAI, not with if it is if this response has come with this document, it would add the citation or the reference over here. But this is all the information that is classic data. So when I click on this respond, so it actually recognized the unknown intent, because we don't have any topic that should actually trigger towards guidelines or rules and regulations over such any such topic that doesn't exist in this copilot. So it actually triggers the unknown intent, which is conversational boosting topic that is provided by the system topic. So it is actually looking into the data sources, but when we edit it, it is actually looking into the classic data, which it allows AI own knowledge. So this is a generic answer that AI can respond with its generic knowledge, but we don't want to the general knowledge to be happened over here, because we have our own policies for that company, and we would switch on this knowledge sources, and which knowledge sources that are to be fetched for this particular thing. We would, if there are multiple knowledge sources, we could select what are all the knowledge sources that we would able to answer user questions. And I will save this, and let's see now how it responds to our question over guidelines. I created like what are some guidelines when creating an expense, when creating a new expense also. So for this, it generated me a response. This is completely different from this response, where this is all crafted based upon the document that I have added. So that is a knowledge that we are grounding our copilot or an agent to, so that maker or developer doesn't actually need to design or develop a topic, but for everything that we expect user for, but we would respond through our knowledge sources we would just give the knowledge sources to the copilot or agent, and this generative AI feature would actually generate a response from the knowledge sources that is grounded, and it responds with that generative AI response. So if you could see, it would actually giving what is the reference that it had brought all this information from. So this is the same document that we uploaded as a knowledge source. So that's how that's all the building blocks that we covered, where we actually started with the topics. We we have seen some of the default and the system topics, where there are some custom topics that they are created by creating an agent itself, like like the greetings topic, like good morning, goodbye and greetings. And even the conversation starts, some of the topics are system topics. You could actually enable or disable them, or you can also add more nodes or delete the existing nodes over them, or altogether you could create a new topic. We have seen that. We have reviewed the existing topics, we created a new topic. We played around with nodes like adaptive cards, asking questions, entities, and we ask actions, and then conditions. And we also created a new knowledge source and made our OpenAI to respond from that. And also the generative orchestration, that the main reference we had seen, without even compiling or creating a new topic, it actually performed what it should perform. The two agents had performed what it should do, but the difference is how AI is taking over all this process without maker or developer being creating manually these topics. So that's how that's we would need all this information, and we would need all this expertise in these concepts to create our custom agents from scratch. So that's all from for my session today, and I am open to any questions. I couldn't see any questions so far in the comments, but I'll be here for answering any of your questions.
Thank you so much, Sandeep, for hosting this session, and thank you all for joining us today. Please visit Microsoft Reactor website for more upcoming sessions. Also, we would appreciate your feedback on today's session as it will help us to curate future sessions. Please scan the QR code and do share your feedback. Today's event ID is 24610. Feel free to use the Learn module link. This will give you access to additional resources to take your learning further. And in case you want to connect with Sandeep later, please feel free to do so. I will share his credentials also. But yes, we have one question. So, Sandeep, that's up on
Yep.
the screen.
Yeah, how for creating an account for Copilot Studio, personal email also works, but it is preferred to have a Microsoft account first, and you would need at least a few licenses to just get started. Because I would start with E3 license, because it gives you access to the Power Platform, and you would actually try using the free trial just for your hands-on and all. But Copilot Studio heavily works on licensing part, and there is more licensing updates in the last couple days for licensing overall. But if you have at least E3 license, you could get access to Power Apps for 90 days, I think. You could actually use Power Apps and all, but for Copilot Studio, you would get a 30 days access for pre-trial with E3 licenses. But if you would need to develop production ready systems and all, it's a whole lot of discussion with the Copilot Studio licensing itself.
Thank you, Sandeep. So, at the moment, we just had only one question. Folks have already shared Sandeep's social handle um, on the comment section. Please feel free to, reach out to him in case if you have any further questions. Thank you once again, Sandeep, and thank you everyone for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Rashmita, and thanks everyone for joining over me here today.